obviously, David, thanks for coming on the show and chatting to us. We appreciate it, mate.
Yeah, happy to be here.
It's kind of an interesting side of things coming through the sports psychology side, because we're always talking about a lot of times it's mainly focused in the physical side of the sport in mixed martial arts. And I was looking into obviously your background, and I know you'd sort of started at SGB Ireland while you were at university. Can you tell us a wee bit about how that came about and how you ultimately ended up in SGB? And I believe it was at Aislinn Daily you started working with initially? Yeah,
it was Ash. So I was doing my master's in sports psychology, and part of the course we had to do a placement with a team and with an individual athlete. So for the individual athlete, I knew I wanted to work with a fighter. So I got in touch with John Kavanagh. This is back in 2009. Got in touch with John. He was building a team at that point. That was like, the reputation was already building in Dublin. So John was interested straight away, and he thought Aisling Daly would be the best candidate. She was up for it as well. So I did my placement with her, which was kind of, perfect timing, because she was getting ready for a fight like 4 weeks out or 6 weeks out at the time. So we were kind of working on stuff. I was in college. I was still learning myself as well. So it was if I look back on it now, I'm sure I'd be cringing at the stuff I was doing, but it was a great experience, and it went well. And then John kind of asked the rest of the team to come to a seminar of mine, kind of introduce what I was doing. So we so everyone was kind of on the same page, on what this actually was, which hopefully your listeners will know a better idea by the end of this as well, what's actually involved. And then so I was just available to work with all the guys in the team from that point on. So we'd work together individually, and we do some group stuff as well. So that was, I stuck with the team then through the years.
Yeah, and back in 2009, obviously we see a bit more about sports psychology these days, but that was I guess the early days in terms of that side of things in the sport.
There was a few. There's like GSP had worked with a guy, but it wasn't really that common back then. It's much more common now.
What was it like when you first started working? Because obviously it's like you say, you were still training at the time, so it was, you were learning on the job, I guess, at the time. But for the fighters, I mean, this is a completely new thing, obviously. So it's an adjustment for them. So what was that initial period like for you?
So I mean, it was like you said, it was fast learning on the job kind of thing. I had done all the kind of the research work and the book work and that kind of stuff but it's a matter of putting it into practice. So I had to find my own style in a way, and how to get across my ideas and what to do. So I definitely got better at it over the years. But the big thing for the start, and it is still the case now, is it's just making sure they know what it is so that there is no magic here. There's no quick fix. There's nothing that I'm going to say that's going to make you immediately, mentally tough or improve your performances or whatever. It's about understanding that this is hard work you have to put in, and maybe it's a way of finding a better way of doing things, or improving in certain areas mentally. But you have to put the graft in. You have to be working. That was always the first kind of message, and that's still the same way now.
And even over the years you've worked with fighters, are you constantly having to adjust what you do to fit in with different personalities, different people? Because it's like anything else, what works for one may not for the other. Is that an ongoing challenging thing for you every time you work with a new fighter or a new sports person? Yeah,
I mean, the stuff is pretty much the same. The basic fundamentals of what I'm doing. So it's like martial arts in a way. There's the fundamentals to this that you need to have down, but then there's personality differences that kind of the style of how you do things. I need to get to know the person and how they tick, what their core values are, why they're actually doing this, what they want out of it, how they see themselves, and then how I communicate with them will be different. So some of the fundamental stuff will be the same, but how I even communicate that might be different depending on the fighter. And then some of the different stuff we work on will obviously differ depending on what the challenges are. So, I mean, the fundamental things are things like just knowing what is controllable for you, what's not controllable, being aware of what those things are, understanding that you're going to have to put the work in here. There's no shortcut. It's about hard work all the way through. And then knowing that like it's kind of on you, it's your responsibility how far you go in this. There's hard luck stories and all that kind of stuff. There's luck involved, but for the most part, it's about how much you're going to put into it. So we'll have ways of improving, but the core stuff is always the same.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there about, because it's something just not in sports, and I guess in general life, it's the control aspect of things, what you can and what you can't control. Because I know some people that focus on things that they just have no control over, and it drives them crazy in day-to-day life. So is that something you get out specific fighters that will be worrying about possibly what's happening in a crowd, something just that they have completely no impact on, and I guess you're trying to get them to move their mindset away from worrying about stuff like that?
Yeah, the biggest one is the result of the fight. So that's a non-controllable as I see it, winning and losing. The controllable part of it is the performance you're putting in. So if you're worrying about whether you're going to win or not, immediately you're thinking about the wrong stuff. You're thinking about something that's outside of your control. What you want to do is you want to put in your performance, and then the result will look after itself if you go in and perform to your best. That's literally all you can do. I mean, it sounds cliche and everything, but if you go in and perform to your best, that's it. That's all you can ask yourself. And then your best should be better every time. So that's the work you have to do between fights, is improve. But on the night, go in and put in your performance, and that's all you need to worry about. The result is literally it's just stress, as in it's something that you have no control over, even though you think you do. It's because people will focus on, like you said, the things that they don't control, like the opponent and what he's saying, the fans what they're saying, the promotion, what the promotion is doing, the result of the fight, the judges. All these things are completely outside of your control. If you can get to the point where you're focused on your controllables, putting the best into them, then that's where you want to be.
Yeah, and that's something you see, James. I'll let you come in on this as well, and you can give your take on it, because it's something you see over the years, especially more notably with champions. You see some champions on their rise up who are amazing, and they just look like they're fighting with the brakes off, basically. But once they get that title, it's like there's a switch there. They start fighting not to lose the belt, and is that sort of what you're speaking about there?
Oh yeah, I mean that's the same thing. I mean, you're changing again. If you're on the way up, that's fine. You're kind of I've seen it now. I've seen every stage of it in a way, because when I came in to SPG, the lads were they were on like shows like Cage Contender and starting to get on Cage Warriors and stuff like that. Ash got onto Bellator early enough, but they were just putting in the work and then showing up and putting in a performance. Then when they started to go up the ladder a bit, some of them moved up a little bit. They started to fight for Cage Warriors belts, starting to and things start to change, and you get some attention. You get some people talking about you. There's some media stuff coming in. There's fans. There's talk about getting into the UFC. There's belts to defend. And if you're not careful at that point, things can start to slip away where you lose track of what got you there in the first place, which is the work. But so it's important, and it's a part of what I do with the lads, is to make sure that we're clear on what it is we're asking ourselves to do here, resetting the goals, being clear on the distractions that are kind of part of the sport. In a way, you can't avoid them, but you can definitely put too much attention on them and get away and get off track. And then as you move up again, it becomes like getting into the UFC. And once you're there, it then becomes about getting off that initial tough contract or whatever contract you were on to try to get more money and break into the rankings and all the different stuff. And you got more fans, you got haters now as well. and all that stuff. If you're not careful, it'll just derail you. You need to keep things grounded, keep things focused on where you need to, while being aware of all these things. So it's good for me now, because when I start with someone who's kind of maybe coming through, I've got that experience in a way, so they can benefit from the experience of the lads that came before them, just in terms of the different traps they can fall into on the way up.
Yeah, James, I'd like to bring you in this, obviously, as someone who's fought, who's coaching fighters, and just get your take on some of the stuff we've covered so far.
So just first of all, for kind of the sake of transparency, I know David. We had him in Glasgow for a seminar years ago, and he's worked with a number of my fighters. I think he's at the top of his field for what he does. And also kind of watched from afar, like when David got brought into SPG, like 2009 or whatever, and he mentioned about how at that time John was building the team. And we talking about there as a team that pretty much went on to that night in Dublin with the 5 guys on that card, and the 5 of them all won. I think it was Conor in the main event, but Paddy was on, and Cahill was on, Ash was on, and Gunnar Nelson was on and stuff. And so it's just like, for me, I'm quite friendly with John as well, and it was just part of for me sitting on the outside watching it. It was really interesting. It's an area I've always been interested in. Studied it briefly at university, but when I was fighting, the closest we ever got to it was a couple of sharing a couple of books. I was like, I've got this book, and nothing was ever really about combat sports, to be honest. It was always sports with a lot of financial backing, American sports in general, football, baseball, basketball, or maybe track and field and stuff like that. So the closest we kind of got to was that, and I was fortunate enough that for me anyway, a lot of the kind of stuff that a sports psychologist would come pretty organically to me. So like a lot of the self-talk and the visualisation, the goal setting and the controllables and stuff like that, that kind of worked for me. But I struggled as a coach to kind of impart that in my students to an extent. Like I can sit and have a conversation with them, or I can make them read about it. So when we started working with David, I noticed a massive change in the guys from our team that I was working with. And I think at the time, like David said, back in 2009 and stuff, there wasn't a lot of teams getting involved in that. And I think it was a good thing. Obviously, he's went to the timing with David going to SPG at that time, and the rise of those guys and what John was doing at the time was brilliant. So everyone just kind of meshed together. So and it all kind of affected, and you've obviously seen what's happened to SPG since then. But I think that the fact that sports psychologists they're getting more recognition now, they're seen as being a massive part of the support network for fighters and stuff like that is a very good thing. It's a positive thing, especially with sports like fighting, which is massively affected by like the mental side of it, or the mental side is probably the biggest part of it, really.
Yeah, and I would imagine David, I don't know if you work with other across other sports, but just focusing on fighting is a wee bit different, I guess, in team sports, and obviously the consequences are so high what can happen out there. And I mean, effectively, if you're fighting in the UFC, you're fighting in front of millions of people in front of your underwear, risking potential bad damage. Do you think this is a sport that really needs more focus or from fighters and gyms to look at that side of things, the mental side, the sports psychology side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I do, obviously, but there's levels as well. I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant or whatever, but there's bullshitters out there as well, and lots of them, because it's very easy to call yourself a mental coach. You can just call yourself a mental coach and then bang, you're a mental coach. And people don't, like, the problem is people don't really know what it is. So if you're working with a guy, they don't know if it's legit or if it's total bullshit, and that's a problem. And that can put a bad spin on things, get a bad reputation for everyone, like one bad apple kind of thing. So that's definitely out there. And it's amazing some of these guys get a bit of a reputation, and it's dangerous. It's garbage. Like, it really is.
See, you say that, and I immediately think of Diego Sanchez's new coach.
Well, yeah, that's an obvious one. That's an obvious one. But there's more. Like, there's more that are less obvious than him. I remember once watching one of the countdown shows, and there was a guy fighting, and they showed a clip with him in the build-up, working with his sports psych, and they were talking about wearing a suit of armor to protect him and stuff like this. Imagining a suit of armor on him, and that to me is. It's not just nonsense, it's dangerous as well, because the fighter is out there thinking he's working on his mental game then, and he's not. He's actually doing the reverse. He's not just not improving, he's getting worse in that side of things. So
it's stuff like that then, if you hear a guy saying that, because I would imagine if a fighter's in there fighting, and this is coming from a completely layman's point of view, I'd imagine trying to think of yourself with a suit of armour on would ultimately be quite distracting.
Yeah. There's no logic behind it whatsoever.
And does it slow your punches down? Does it slow your movements down?
Yeah.
Realistically, we don't want to be wearing suits of armour unless you're doing that crazy Russian stuff where they've got weapons. But does it make you cringe when you see stuff like that? Do you almost want to reach out to fighters and say, "Come on, man, you need to look at this guy"?
Yeah, but I mean, there's bad coaches as well. I mean, there's bad strength and conditioning coaches. There's levels to all these things. But I do feel like the mental side, it's easier to spoof it. That's the problem.
I think it's a bit more on. Sorry, on you go, James.
We have, like, almost on a weekly basis, guys contacting our fighters through social media and offering. It's the mind coach thing or the lifestyle coach, and I have a problem with these guys not a problem. I don't know if I'm just getting old and I've got less time for paying bullshit and stuff. But when you see these guys and they're like, "Oh, this guy's contacted me. He's a mind coach, but he's also a nutritionalist and a strength conditioning coach," and I'm like, "Are you aware of how much research there and reading there is to be an expert in those three different fields?" Because at one point I was coaching martial arts. I would also be doing our team strength and conditioning when I was at university, and even kind of helping with the nutritional side of things. But I didn't really have much a clue in the nutritional side of things. But I made a conscious effort, I think maybe about 2008, to outsource all the strength conditioning stuff, because I couldn't keep up with the reading and the studying, and I wanted to be better at actually coaching, like the martial arts side of stuff, the technique side. And I found if I was taking my time to read up and catch up with the strength and the kind of latest material on strength and conditioning, the martial arts was suffering, and vice versa. And then when these guys now come and approach my fighters and they're like, "I can help you with every area of your game," I'm like, "Well, you're probably bullshit at every area. You've got a couple of ideas." Whereas when you get a guy who's like a specialist in one area, and they can give you information that's valuable in other areas, and it'll branch off and it'll interconnect and stuff. But there's so many kind of like just con men out there, and you see them all the time. Whether it's the main coach thing, the nutritionalist, the meal prep guys are now sending everybody the same fucking meal, or the very generic strength and conditioning coaches guys, or ex bodybuilders and stuff. There's so many people. I think as more money gets pumped into MMA, you're seeing all these guys just attaching themselves to these fighters, try to screw them out of money.
Mm-hmm. Big time, yeah. And like, it might sound whatever, but I've never actually contacted a fighter to ask them to work with me. I like, besides when I contacted John first to do the placement, if they'd be interested, and it kind of just happened then that like you James and Paul got in touch, and then other teams got in touch and other fighters got in touch. But I've never, like, what tends to happen is if I'll start working with a guy and then he'll recommend one of his teammates or whatever, and it grows that way. But I've never actually reached out to someone and said, "I would like to work with you. I can help you," because to me, this is different. This is like, it's a personal thing. We're going to talk about stuff in sessions, like it's all confidential, but I want them to be as open as possible. And we're going to talk about some stuff that they mightn't be able to talk about with other people. So it's very difficult to ask someone, hey, I want to work with you. They have to kind of approach me in a way they have to want to do it, I feel like. So coaches have recommended to fighters, hey, I think this would be useful for you. That's a different thing. But I wouldn't be a fan of saying to someone, let me work with you. Even though that's,
it feels then if they're approaching you, it's like you said, they would be more open to seeking your help. And over you, how many fighters are you working with these days? You don't need to give names or anything like that. How busy is your schedule with fighters at the moment?
Yeah, so I've tended to have like a rule, as in one fighter per division. In like say the UFC and now there's lots of lads in Bellator as well that around that I'm working with that like since it's kind of grown in Europe. But so that's generally a rule, and then a few younger lads coming through. I definitely don't have someone in every division in the UFC. Like I don't have a heavyweight or a light heavyweight now. I don't have I have a women's strawweight, but I don't have any other women's divisions, and there's don't have a men's flyweight. But yeah, so like but then I'll have the rest of the divisions and guys in Bellator and amateur guys coming through, or guys in like Cage Warriors or a few promotions in the States and stuff. But it's always been a pretty steady flow. Obviously the sessions get busier as a fight approaches, so I tend to do like the general usual thing is once a fight gets confirmed, we'll do a session about that fight. So if you like, I'll just give you an idea of how that would go in the build up, say. So we'll do the initial session once it's confirmed. They have a date, they have an opponent. Sometimes they might have a date first and they don't have an opponent yet. So we'll talk about the story, I like to call it, of every fight, because we can almost tell the story before the fight even happens. As in, what's unique about this challenge now? Like, if we know the opponent, what's he mean to you? Do you know him? How do you perceive him? What do you think of his team or his style, or what people have said about him? All that stuff that can be in a fighter's head about their opponent. Because I've had cases where fighters have built up their opponent to be some kind of, put them on a pedestal that they didn't belong on. So a lot of the work in the build-up is taking them off that pedestal and seeing them as, seeing them for who they really are, not who they've built them up to be. So then they can get on with the job of putting in the performance. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the venue, because it might be at home, which brings its own unique challenge with family and friends and supporters around, or it might be away from home, as in his or hers hometown, and what that means, or it might be a travel, whatever. There's a different story behind every fight. There might be injuries that they have that we need to talk about. There might be a bigger weight cut or whatever it might be that they have. It might be short notice, so that the weight might be an issue to get that down. So that's something to discuss. There's stuff that around the last fight they've had, if they've come in off a loss, or they've lost a few in a row or something like that. Or they've won a few in a row, they're unbeaten, whatever. Everything can have a different story. Then there's what can be on the line, as in, is it for a title? Is it for a title shot? Is it to get into the UFC? Is it if you don't win this, you might get cut, kind of thing. Every there can be lots of different scenarios. So we put all that out and we discuss it, see it for what it is. Because I don't want that stuff that's around to be festering almost and kind of building inside their head as the build-up progresses. I want to get that stuff out as early as we can, see it for what it is, put it on the table, and then be clear on those things, so that we can start to move on with the preparation and focusing on the performance. Now, we might talk about these things every week in the build-up, but I want to be clear on how we see them, and be free to discuss them. So we do that initially, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess if you've had, I don't know if you've had any guys you've been working with who've been fighting during COVID-19.
Yeah, that's a unique challenge as well. So
yeah,
sparring is gone, and there's like I've had a few. So it's been different, obviously. Preparations. If we're talking in ideal times, you get to train as you want to train, get the sparring in, all that stuff. And now it's different. You can't train as you want to train. You can't get the sparring like you would want to get. So we have to kind of see that. If you're taking the fight, though, then this is part of it.
Absolutely.
If you're accepting it, be honest with yourself. That it is what it is. But if you're in, you're in. That's another thing. If you're in for a fight, then you have to be all in. I don't want someone having, because you have to be careful. If you have this doubt in your head of, well, I don't get to spar like I would usually. I don't get to train like I would usually. That can almost be like a safety net that you have for yourself, where if you don't put in your best performance, you can tell yourself afterwards, yeah, but if I had have had a real full camp, I would have won it. Because if that's there in the build up, and if you then that can be reflected in the performance where you're not fully all in.
I guess with stuff like that as well, if you've got that element of doubt and that excuse, that built-in excuse that you can use if you lose, is that something that you would then have to let a fighter know that could potentially be something that continues on in his career, where that has effects going forward? Well,
yeah, I mean, you can think of examples that in sports over the years where, like, I won't throw anyone under the bus that I've never talked to, but there's plenty of examples where you think of someone who's come up with an excuse really quickly after, and that wasn't theirs because that didn't just come to them after the fight. That was there in the build-up.
Yeah.
They were having that, and other guys have self-handicapped in a way, like they've purposely not put in their best preparation just so they can have something to fall back on, even if they don't know that that's why they're doing it. Guys drinking before the fight or doing coke before the fight and stuff like that. A lot of that seems like it's just other wild, but a lot of it is because they want to have a little thing to fall back on afterwards, that if it doesn't go their way. Because then, look at me, I'm a hero, I'm a legend, I just won, and I was doing all this partying beforehand. That's cool, but then the flip side is, oh, well, it's not. I would have won if I had taken it seriously. So, all that stuff can fester in.
James, from your point of view, is just as a coach in the gym, is this stuff you recognise as well, and you can see in guys?
Yeah, you can see it. Like, you just need to sit and observe. But a lot of my job is observing people, and you can sometimes see that with guys. By the time my guys get to like the good level, like Cage Warriors titles and UFC and stuff, most of that stuff should kind of be ironed out. But I see it quite a lot in the amateur guys or some of the younger pro guys, when you can see them making excuses before anything's happened. Like, they'll come in and I've not slept very well last night and stuff like that. And then it's just it's a weird kind of facet of human nature that where it's, instead of just losing honestly, they need some kind of excuse or David said, like a handicap, someone just to blame it on, instead of just being like, I lost, I've done my absolute best there or whatever. They need some kind of inbuilt thing, whether it's an injury or I've never prepared right or I've got a sore tummy, or do you know what I mean? Let's find something. It's the mind's such a fragile thing, especially when you're involved in combat sports, where your ego is going to take a hammering if stuff doesn't go your own way. And a lot of what we do in the gym is we try and not hammer the ego, but we try and suppress it through training before anybody even gets near a cage to compete. But it is very prevalent now. I know a great boxing coach, Teddy Atlas, talks about that quite a lot. He's got quite a big story about Michael Moorer doing it before the fight with Evander Holyfield. He's caught him sneaking out and stuff like that. And he's one day was skipping on his road work, I think, like that. And his reasoning behind it was, Teddy Atlas's was that when Moorer fails, he's going to say it's because I've never done the road work. So Teddy Atlas has spoke to him about it and kind of fixed it. But it seems to be it's a lot more prevalent than what people notice, that kind of behaviour in fighters.
Mm-hmm. I think a big part of it is a big part of my work with lads is to let them know that it's okay to have some doubts and it's okay to be nervous and stuff, because there's a perception out there, and it gets spread, that you need to have all doubt removed. But you don't. That's nonsense. Like, how could you? You're a human being. So you need to be okay to live with some doubts. That's what really needs to happen, where you need to be honest with yourself. It's okay to be nervous. It's okay to have fear and doubt heading in. That's fine. That's natural. It'd be weird if you didn't. In a way, you'd want to be a little bit of a sociopath to not feel some of that stuff heading into a fight. But the point where you start to become comfortable almost with those feelings, you let them be what they are. And instead of trying everything to avoid feeling like that because you don't want to admit that you're nervous or fearful or have some doubts, instead you accept that you do. Of course you do, and then you get back to focusing on what it is you're actually asking yourself to do, which is go and put in a performance. Because all of the great performances we've ever seen were done by a guy who was afraid beforehand, who had some doubts and some nerves beforehand. Some guys are it's more obvious than other guys that they're feeling it, but trust me, they're all feeling it, all of them.
Yes.
And some fighters don't know that. And when I tell them it's okay to, I mean, you can see the relief in some of them first, when some of the younger lads, especially when you start talking to them about that stuff. It's a relief to know that the bigger guys are feeling it too.
It's got to be there. It's like you say, you would need to be a sociopath to not feel anything like that. Is there any particular fighters you've worked with that stood out to you, just how mentally strong, and how is there any particular you've worked with that you felt was, I'm trying to think of my word in here, but you know what I mean, anyone that stands above the rest, or anyone that you've worked with and you just felt like they were so mentally strong?
Well, mentally strong is a funny one to define. I mean, there's different ways of being mentally strong. Like Conor was probably the most mentally strong guy in terms of putting the work in, that and just outworking people, and then being comfortable under pressure, wanting that pressure, knowing that this is the stage to go and deliver now. But then, like, there's other forms of it, like Owen Roddy and Cahill and people like that, who, if they're in a fight, you could never count them out. You know, like, no matter if they're what position they're in or how, if they're behind or whatever, there's so much grit and toughness and fight in them. There's a, you know, that's a different thing again. And then there's guys like Cobb and people like that who have stayed in the game for such a long time, delivering such a level of performance and having to bounce back from disappointments and stuff like that. That's a lot of toughness as well. So there's many more as well over the years. There's different ways of having mental toughness too. Yeah. It can mean different things, but to me, it's the biggest thing is going in and performing when it really counts, because you hear it all the time about people afterwards saying, "Oh, if I got that one back over, if I got a rematch, I'd win that," or that wasn't. I got robbed or whatever. I didn't perform to my best. I would next time. Part of this sport is you only get that night to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, it's brutal, but it is what it is. It's like there's the date. You have to go and perform on that night. It doesn't matter what you could do afterwards, or if you got it back over. It's about can you deliver on that night? That's what it's really about.
Yeah, and I guess it's like that cliche in fighting, James. I'm sure you've probably seen this many times. Is you do hear about guys who in the gym are absolute animals and are handling everyone, but when it comes to fight night, it just all seems to sort of fall apart. And I guess that's part of where the sports psychology things can come in and benefit guys. But that's an old cliche in fighting. You hear about the guys in the gym that are amazing, but just can't make that switch when it comes to that time where the pressure's on.
I think every gym's got those guys. I know we've had a few. We kind of refer to them as like gym world champions. It's guys that they're absolutely flawless in the gym, and they go through guys that they shouldn't really be going through. But then when it gets to under competition rules or under the pressure and stuff, they fall to bits. And then we've got other guys who don't look anything special in the gym, and when you put them under pressure into those situations, they rise to the occasion and almost overachieve sometimes. I think every gym I've ever been in's got those guys, and we get guys visit, and usually they'll come to spar with the big name guys, but they'll get more trouble off these guys, like these gym world champions that maybe can't string 3 or 4 amateur wins together, but they're beating guys who've got winning records in the UFC and stuff like that. And again, it's such a, when you are fighting, you've got such a short time frame. If these guys are starting at 16, they can maybe fight to 30, 32 or whatever, sometimes past that or whatever, depending on sometimes with the weight class and stuff, but trying to get them technically proficient, get them physically ready for the challenge ahead, and then deal with the mental side of it as well. It's such a hard blend to get, and then it makes, as a coach, when I see guys, especially like Connor and stuff, who's consistently dealing with that pressure and performing so well all the time, it makes you appreciate the guys so much more. Even like GSP and stuff, when you sit and look at what those guys have actually done, it's absolutely frightening.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, guys like, sorry, David, you were talking about earlier, you mentioned Connor. Guys like, is there particular guys you work with and you just know straight away they've got something, they're going to be something special? I know there's coaches, and James has said it in the past, you can sometimes recognise in a guy early that he's got all the tools there to be a great fighter. But can you see it from your side of from the sports psychology side? Is that something you can notice early in a fighter?
I mean, it is in a way, just how they're putting in the work, how they respond to some setbacks and stuff like that. The way they talk about themselves, the way they talk about some things, as in seeing things as challenges, knowing that maybe I'm not there yet, but if I do X, Y, Z, then I will be there. That kind of stuff. I mean, I remember. I mentioned off the top that kind of seminar I did initially with SPG after working with Ash when John actually made it compulsory for the lads to go along. It was on a Saturday in the gym, the old gym on the Long Mile, and so the whole team was in there, and I was talking about the different topics. I was talking about like the difference between confidence and kind of false confidence, where you think you're up here, but you're actually here. That gap, if you're not willing to put the work in, is basically just bullshit in between those two things. But if you're seeing as I can get there, I can be here, I'm here now, I will work, I will improve, and I will be here. That's a different thing. That's the confidence to improve. But sometimes think they're here, and they don't see the difference. But I was talking about that stuff, and then Connor jumped in and said, "Yeah, but I'm going to be in the UFC. I'm going to be a world champion." He was at the time, I think he had maybe one fight in Cage Warriors or whatever. So he always had that self-belief. But that's okay saying that stuff. But then when you see the work that's been put in to back that up, that's what makes the difference. Because plenty of other lads said that to me after that, and I've said that to me over the years, and it was, you've nenever heard of them, so.
And I guess as well, it can be a challenge. I know James has said this on many occasions. Just working with fighters alone can be fairly challenging. So, is there frustrations there at times? And I know in the past, obviously, James has mentioned that sometimes fighters can be pretty difficult to work with, and I've had a wee bit of experience with trying to set interviews up and stuff like that. It can be a bit tricky. So, is there frustration sometimes there with fighters?
Yeah, I mean, there can be, just because you see a lad who's not being open enough. He's not being honest enough. You're trying to learn different ways to get him to open up, and I'm always trying to build a trust and everything. But that they're not really being open about what it is. Now that's pretty rare, to be honest, but it does happen, and it is, it's disappointing because then they're kind of lying to themselves about how much work they're putting in, that to me is frustrating. When someone's kind of not living up to their potential, or not putting in the graph like they need to, and not being honest enough and open enough about maybe why they're not doing that stuff. But like I said, that's pretty rare, to be honest with you, with who I've been able to work with over the years.
Good. Then, James, I'll just let you jump in if you've got any questions you want to fire across. I'm sure you've got a few.
I could be here all night, to be honest. It's obviously a subject that fascinates me, man. It's nice to hear you talk about stuff again, David. One thing, this is more so for myself, basically. If you could recommend like 3 books, you would have I know you recommend books to the guys you're working with, so without getting any of your kind of secrets away, if you can recommend maybe 3 books for aspiring MMA fighters or combat sport athletes to read.
I get that question a lot. There's no secrets. There's no secrets. There's no secrets with my stuff at all. Like there's no, never mind books wise, but just in terms of the work as well. There's no secrets to the trade, because if there is, it's magic and it's nonsense then. So that's one thing. But I get asked that question. My answer is there's some good books out there. Like there's Bounce. I like Bounce. I like a book called, it doesn't seem like it's anything to do with sports psychology. It was a book called The One Thing, which is a pretty short one, but it's just about kind of focusing on one thing at a time, and the idea of multitasking as, it doesn't exist. So yeah, those kind of things I like. And what I always say as well is, because I tend to recommend lads to start, especially younger fighters coming through, but really everyone, to do a training journal. So the generic kind of usual standard headings I would give is like the things I did today. So that would be, if you're training, what you're actually working on, and if you're working on some technique, detail the few little steps that are involved. The little details worded in your own way. What you were actually doing. So if you're working on finishing the triangle or something, there's little nitty gritty details that you need to note. So whatever it is you're working on, put that down and put the details in. And not just that stuff. If you were doing like strength and conditioning session or whatever, put the details in of what it was you were working on. If you're sparring, put a note in of the number of rounds, who you sparred with, and some notes on, okay, I got taken down in this, I did well against this guy, keeping my range or whatever. Just a few little notes. It doesn't need to be like every detail, but the main points. So that's the first thing. Second thing would be the things I did, things I need to improve on based on today. So like a list of, right, I got taken down against the fence, was falling short with my jab, or whatever it might be that you know that you need to work on based on that day. And then the third thing would be the things I did well today. So whatever those little details were, get them down. Because over time, if you keep that journal over time, that becomes the best book that you could possibly read about mental strength, mental toughness, mental training. Because if you're keeping it, and if like not just the journal, but if you're putting in the work, and if you're working on the mental side of things, then you should start to see massive improvements over time, to the point where the things you had as things you need to improve, they start to become things you do well. And you can it's great heading into a fight on fight week where you're not doing, you're doing fuck all actual work training wise. You have a lot of free time. You can read back over your journal for that camp and see, I don't have to pretend to myself I put the work in. I can see that I put the work in. Look at it's here. It's evidence. I can actually trust myself that I've prepared for this. And oh yeah, I remember those. Like one thing I might get guys to do the week of is pick out their top 10 highlights of the the camp or of the preparation. So that kind of forced them to read back over it and see and remember, oh yeah, I remember that day sparring. I remember doing that session or whatever. So that becomes, you can see improvements fight to fight and everything. So that becomes a really great book, even though you're the one writing it, if it's done properly. Because what tends to happen, obviously, people started and mean well, and then it drifts away. But the ones who've stuck with it and keep it consistently, they really, really see the benefits of it. So that would be a big recommendation.
Brilliant. Well, just lastly from me, anyway, David. Just in terms of how things have been during the pandemic, how has that been? You said earlier that you've been using Zoom a lot, so has Zoom been like? I know Zoom's been excellent for us in terms of the podcast. How has it been doing things via Zoom, and how has it changed? Has it changed how you work at all?
I've been doing it for a while this way, anyways. Like a lot of the sessions I would do with guys are over. Well, it used to be Skype, and then Zoom seems to become the main one now. But yeah, I've been used to that for a long time, because I was based in Dublin, then I was based in London, then I was based in Toronto. Now I'm back based in Ireland. So I've got fighters and athletes all over the world. Like I've got a guy who's from Hong Kong, plays basketball. I've never met the chap, but we know each other really well over the years. I've got like guys that were down in Albuquerque or in California and stuff that most of the stuff we've done is online. I definitely think it helps. It's easier when you get to. It's better face to face, obviously. But if you have had a face to face interaction and you've got to know each other a bit, you can definitely build up rapport and everything over the online calls, especially with the video. I think the video is important, but I've been used to that over the years, so that hasn't really changed anything.
Perfect. And just one last question for me. I'll keep it to the MMA field here. I know you said you wouldn't go and ask a fighter to work with, but it's a hypothetical here. If there's one guy that you've never worked with out there, and is there any particular fighter you would quite like to work with and just maybe get inside their head a wee bit? I don't know, a la John Jones, that would be, I'm sure, interesting. Is there any guy you would quite like to work with, just to see their work and
Not really. I mean, it sounds like a cop-out answer, but I genuinely mean it. Like, not really, because like this might again sound like a bullshitty answer, but I get as much out of working with some amateur guy who's fighting on top or some show in Dublin or whatever that nobody hears and nobody knows, and it means as much to that guy as it does to a John Jones fighting for, if he's going to fight for the heavyweight title or whatever. So to me, it's not about the level of the guy. It's about how much they're going to put into it. That's who I want to work with, is someone who is honest, open, willing to put the work in, and then actually goes and does it. Like, as in when we're talking about like a lot of the work we'll do, I say this all the time as well. We'll have a session, like an hour and a half or whatever it might be, but then the real work is done between sessions where you're actually applying the stuff we were talking about. So seeing lads that actually put in that work and really do it, that's who I want to work with. So it's not like like I've worked with lots of, like, well, not lots, but several UFC champions and stuff, and several other levels, and it's all about what they're willing to do.
I guess it's much like a coach as well. A coach who takes a guy from the amateur ranks and moves him up to the top of the food chain probably gets more satisfaction. Is the same thing transferable to you then? If you start working with a guy that early who you see succeeding and go on, have a great career, I guess you get more back for you out of that.
Yeah, I mean, it means a lot when you see someone who you've been with for years progressing and improving and moving up the levels and living up to potential. That's pretty special. Yeah, there's a young lad now. He's a boxer. from Ireland, Tony Brown. I've been with him since he was like 15 or whatever. And his goal was the Olympics 2020 Japan. There is no Olympics 2020 Japan. He got close. He won a national title and he was involved in the Irish team and everything. But now he's turning pro. He signed a deal in the States. But like just seeing that lad progress and move up and the work he's put in behind the scenes, and I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty special. And like that night James talked about in Dublin, where like, you know, Conor and Petty and Cahill and Gunny won, and that was a very special thing as well, because it was even like for John as well, just the amount of behind the scenes work that goes in that people don't have a clue about. And you know, those are the kind of nights that'll be remembered a long time from now. So that kind of stuff is special when you get to see what was put in to get to that point. It is really satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll let you get out of here, James. Anything else you want to just come in with before we wrap up?
No, I'm good, man. It was good to listen to David talk again, man, and just refresh all that information. I'm going to make sure all my students and stuff watch this episode and stuff as well, mate.
Aye. And David, for you, obviously COVID-19 not only has screwed Olympics, and I'm sure it's messed up your calendar. What's the future like for you in terms of seminars and what have you got going on when hopefully COVID finally takes a back?
Yeah, I mean, well, yes, seminars wise, they all got cancelled and postponed and stuff. Yeah. But I did run a few workshops online with some teams and stuff, so I might do that again. Don't have anything and that side of things planned, but there's obviously more sports back now and more things back, so it's good to have some level of normality coming back with more and more sports coming back, because like fighters it's still my main thing. It's my main passion, I guess, with this work as well. But I've worked with basketball players and baseball players and footballers and stuff as well, so all that stuff is back on now too, so it's hopefully it stays back as well.
Yeah, fingers crossed we get back to normality. And if nothing else this year, it looks like everybody's back gardens are looking beautiful. so that seems to be the only benefit we've had this year.
Yeah.
But listen, David, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's been really fun to chat to you and sort of get a bit of insight into the sports psychology thing. So we appreciate the time, mate.
It's a pleasure. Yeah, good to talk to you guys.